My husband is the past now. He is my real family. That was the line. My wife delivered it on stage during our big company gala, publicly replacing me, wiping me from the narrative right in front of my face. What she didn't know was that I had a hidden clause ready to rip it all back. I was nursing my second glass of champagne when she spoke the words. They were loud and clear, ringing with a pride that felt like a declaration of war. He's family now, she purred into the microphone, her hand resting firmly on his chest. It was a gesture of ownership, as though she'd just handed him a damn trophy. A wave of camera flashes lit up the room. The crowd responded with polite smiles and raised glasses, pretending they hadn't just watched a man be publicly destroyed. She never even glanced my way. I wasn't at the main table. In fact, my name wasn't even on the seating chart. My badge simply said consultant in the same small, faded gray font they use for legal fine print. She made sure of it. The strangest part? I didn't flinch. I just finished my drink, swallowing her cruel toast along with the fact that I'd paid for this room, and I owned the logo behind her. Her mother, seated closer, met my eyes briefly during the applause. Her smile never broke, but I caught a flicker of nerves in her gaze. It was that old money arrogance mixed with cheap, quick triumph. Her estate lawyer, Mr. Walters, gave her a little pat on the shoulder, whispering something discreetly. Perhaps a reminder to keep up appearances. Or maybe just a comment on the inconvenient fact that I was still breathing. The new guy, Andrew Anders, or whatever generic, prefab name he had, slung an arm around her waist, acting like he'd been there since day one. A true partner who understood the struggle. He hadn't. He never worked from the garage. He never crashed under the desk during the early funding panic. He never risked a single mortgage. But now he was family. What are you supposed to do when the woman you loved rewrites your shared history while you're standing right there? You smile. You check the time on your watch. You wait. That was the one thing she never grasped about me. I don't resort to shouting matches. I let the documents speak. No, I didn't make a scene. I didn't hurl my glass or grab the mic to scream. I built this. That would have given her exactly what she wanted, drama, and proof of my fragile ego. I simply finished the last sip of champagne. I set the glass down on a passing tray and offered a slight nod toward the stage, like a man admiring a memorial he'd carved himself. If you're still following this and wondering why I didn't retaliate immediately, trust me, I was fighting back, just not in the manner they anticipated. And since you've heard this much, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. 90% of viewers don't, but it makes a huge difference, letting my team bring you these unbelievable, yet true, stories. Back to that night. The music swelled. Not a Spotify playlist, but an orchestra. She'd flown in a string quartet from Berlin. I realized I was probably still paying their advance. She once claimed live music made her feel elegant. I wonder if she felt elegant 6 years ago when I was scrubbing our ramen bowls while she wept, feeling like a nobody, and I told her she was everything. I should have choked on those words when she ascended that stage, soaking up the investor applause like a startup duchess. The real sting wasn't the infidelity. It was the audience's unspoken approval. These weren't strangers. These were people I'd pitched to, board members who knew me as the quiet one. I had mentored 2 of the junior vice presidents. Yet, they watched her erase my existence with a single phrase and happily accepted it because the company was thriving. The market loved our product. Power always prefers a convenient story. That's when my attention drifted to the guest registry near the bar. It was a standard digital tablet, logging every attendee with a signature, timestamp, and face scan. It was easy to overlook, but I didn't miss it. 3 years ago, during a tough negotiation with a stubborn junior partner, I embedded something called Clause 94B deep within the founding agreement. Back then, it was just a hypothetical safety net. Now it was everything. And at 8:02 a.m. Monday morning, it was scheduled to go off without a sound. No fanfare, just a silent, massive shift, like an iceberg finally breaking. She wanted her victory photo with her new family under the banner I designed. Fine. The picture would be her final celebratory lap, and also my definitive proof. The scene was perfectly staged for a corporate coronation. My wife, or rather, the principal founder, was flanked by the 2 men. One hand was draped around her handsome, new accessories waist. The other rested assuredly on Walters's arm. The lighting crew had just perfected the softbox reflection off the gold launch background. The banner proclaimed, "A new era in human design." I recall writing that slogan on a coffee-stained napkin while eating takeout in a desolate parking lot. I still have the napkin. She probably assumes one of her eager interns came up with it. The photographer snapped at least 30 pictures. She kept adjusting her smile, treating it like a polished, calculated presentation, deliberate, but utterly hollow. Walters, naturally, stood ramrod straight, like he personally owned her mother's entire lineage, which, legally, he sort of did. And then there was Andrew, or Adrian. It really didn't matter. He looked engineered in a lab for aspirational LinkedIn profile shots. He couldn't stop grinning, and I couldn't stop watching the slow, painful dissolution of my own past. She uploaded the photo less than 10 minutes later. No internal checks, no second thoughts, no filter, just pure, unadulterated hubris. The caption read, "True family, true vision." To seal the deal, she tagged Forbes, Business Insider, and the lead investor's daughter, the same girl I once patiently bought coffee for before she landed her first analyst job. It truly is amazing how quickly loyalty evaporates when the champagne starts flowing. I doubt she even knew I saw her upload the post live. I was barely 6 feet away, near the bar, where the registry tablet was partially concealed by the flower arrangements and brushed steel pitchers. Standard gala protocol, time-stamped RSVP logs. But our specific guest list was tied to the Custodian index, meaning every name was significant. There was Walter S. Franklin, checked in at 6:43 p.m. His title, Advisory Counsel, Franklin Estate Management, was meticulously entered by the front desk assistant, a woman who valued precision. A man of his age wouldn't have given it a second thought. He certainly wouldn't have grasped the consequences of posing with the founder's spouse under a banner funded by Series A money, all while his name was officially logged as a legacy legal stakeholder. Clause 94B was elegant because it didn't rely on drama. It required only documented proof of alignment during a public, investor-facing event. The beautiful, poetic irony? The clause made no mention of infidelity. The actual trigger was a conflict of representation involving declared shareholders during an official brand presentation. Simply put, don't smile for a photo shoot with your mother's estate lawyer while calling your new boyfriend family in front of the logo your husband still legally controls. No one saw me leave. I didn't draw attention. I didn't bother with my coat, and I left my name badge on the bar next to a damp glass of ginger ale. Passing the valet stand, I took one final look at the building. It was tall and impressive, exactly as she had always envisioned. Inside, people were still dancing to the curated jazz ensemble. The lights twinkled. Everything looked utterly perfect from the outside. She thought the high-profile cameras were her weapon. She never considered I was the one monitoring the footage that actually counted. There was a second iPad beneath the counter, linked to the same guest registry system and backed up to a drive in a server closet. She forgot we still rented that space because I paid the bill every year, personally. The woman who used to rage at me for forgetting to file receipts now boasted about being completely hands-off. She believed delegation was power. She never learned that indifference is the shortest route to disaster. She was completely oblivious that the gala was not the triumphant peak of her empire. It was simply the last glittering photograph before the freefall began. She could smile all she wanted. The metadata was poised to tell the entire story. The folder itself was beige, edges slightly worn and brittle, warped from years spent at the bottom of my home filing cabinet, nestled among old dental records and a warranty for a printer we'd never used. Scrawled on the tab in my handwriting, Constitution drafts. Final. Nothing exciting, nothing emotional, just years of preemptive caution disguised as diligent preparation. I remember writing it. She was pacing barefoot in the living room, practicing a pitch to invisible investors. I was hunched over my laptop, typing with one hand and juggling numbers with a calculator in the other. She was brilliant then, no question, driven by a conviction like a burning prairie fire. But she was also emotionally volatile and reckless. I loved her too much to ever voice my concerns, but I prepared for the day she either burned out or used that fire to burn me. That was the origin of the founder's integrity provision, Section 94B, a boring little block of text buried deep in the general dissolution guidelines. It was deceptively simple. Its legal phrasing was so dull that nobody on her team, not even Walters, flagged it. They were too busy puffing up their chests during the equity negotiations to notice that the phrase custodian override was essentially a loaded firearm. The clause presented itself as a defense against corporate sabotage. However, its true potency wasn't in its wording, but in its trigger conditions. If a designated shareholder, during any formal investor gathering, engaged in public misrepresentation or collaborated with unauthorized parties during an official presentation, all voting shares would temporarily revert to the initial funder for a maximum of 72 hours. No court appearance, no hearing required, just time-stamped evidence proving a breach of transparency. Perfect for hostile takeovers. Or, well, galas. Her legal team reviewed the clause once, early during the Series A push. She skimmed it, laughed, and affectionately called me her paranoid genius husband. I called her my little flamethrower. We kissed, and she immediately got distracted by a potential Forbes write-up, never looking back at the document. The critical detail she missed was that the trust established to hold her shares was intrinsically linked to that clause. While she was celebrating a new era, I was loading the original PDF onto a secure, burner laptop in my garage. The file bore the original digital signatures of all three of our lawyers, dated sealed, and immutable. It was the kind of paperwork nobody thinks to check until it resurfaces years later with a trail that incinerates everything. She never questioned why I insisted on keeping the Constitution files in hard copy. She just called me a digital dinosaur. I told her some things were simply safe for collecting dust. She scoffed at the metal safe, the locked filing cabinets, and the external backups. She mockingly referred to it as my startup doomsday prepping. But that paper, that very paper, contained her actual doomsday. There were 4 physical copies, one secured in my safe, one in a bank deposit box, one filed inactive with our corporate legal assistant, and one laminated in an envelope labeled activate only if necessary. She once used that very envelope to prop up a wobbly kitchen table. She had no idea. The clause didn't just freeze the board, it halted every vote, every restructuring plan, and every attempted change. If someone pulled a stunt like declaring a new family member while posing with a lawyer officially tied to a rival estate firm, it instantly became a reviewable breach of fiduciary duty. Her boyfriend was irrelevant. Walters was the key. He had been flagged in our compliance logs for approving 2 separate deals involving estate assets. All that was necessary was his name on the guest list, his presence on the gala stage, and her voice on video declaring him family. A perfect triple match. Clause 94B flared to life. No scandal, no shouting, just the silent, inexorable transfer of control from her hands back into mine for 72 critical hours. And I was not going to waste a single second. I didn't need revenge. The paperwork was more than enough. The email deployed from the server at precisely 8:02 a.m. sharp. Not a minute early, not a minute late. I had written the automated script 3 years earlier, calibrated down to the exact second, during a weekend when she was off at a wellness retreat and I was home with a bottle of whiskey and a spreadsheet full of conditional logic. The file was named Safeguardation Integrity 9.4BD. The script was buried within a dormant email account we'd set up during our early development days, a ghost inbox created years ago to skirt Google Drive limitations. It hadn't transmitted a message in 1,176 days until that specific morning. It wasn't even my first task of the day. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, reviewed a few notes, opened the server terminal, confirmed the timestamp alignment, and watched the countdown tick to 0. The moment it executed, the email vanished from the screen. No confirmation prompts, no dramatics. Just a clean, surgical strike. The subject line, Clause 94B. Activation event confirmed. The email body was sparse, a single, devastating sentence. Per the founding agreement and verified documentation, Custodian override is initiated. Below were 3 damning attachments. 1. Guest registry gala_meta_photos, CSV, extracted from the server. I still retained administrative access thanks to a forgotten legacy credential. 2. Snapshot badge entry.png, a clean digital export from the registry system, showing Walter S. Franklin's timestamped entry at 6:43 p.m., with his title, Legal Advisor, Franklin Estate Group. 3. Capture badge speech.mp4, a 42-second video clip from the overhead security camera. It captured her on the stage, smiling at the crowd, and saying, "He's family now." Walters was visible behind her, the lover's hand on her hip. All meticulously synced, logged, and irrefutably damning. The 4th attachment was the PDF of the clause itself, pre-signed and notarized years before, encrypted and stored across 3 locations. When the system identified the metadata match, a recognized conflicting party present at an investor event and publicly endorsed by a founding shareholder, it executed the clause instantly. That is the genius of automated compliance. There's no need for debate. You simply set the mechanism and let the natural process of consequence begin. Somewhere across the city, the compliance officer from our Series A firm was opening his inbox, probably still bleary-eyed, expecting a typical Monday backlog. Instead, he found a legal nuclear option elegantly wrapped in corporate etiquette. They would read the clause, read it again, scroll through the attachments, match Walters' name to the guest list, the timestamp to the footage. They would hear her words, with her lawyer and her romantic risks standing right beside her, and they would realize this was not a petty emotional outburst. It was a cold, silent execution, carried out by the very clause they had all signed off on, back when they assumed the threat would come from competitors, not from the co-founder's own marriage. At 8:07 a.m., my delivery receipt confirmed the email was opened. By 8:14 a.m., the automated compliance system flagged it for board notification. At 8:23 a.m., the first internal chat appeared on the mirror channel I still quietly monitored. Can someone explain this Clause 94B again? It says Custodian override. It's active. The final reply to that message read, "Check the attachments." He really did it. I didn't reply. I just shut the terminal and took another sip of coffee. It tasted unusually strong. She had absolutely no idea what toxic element had just been introduced into her company's bloodstream. But by lunchtime, the symptoms would be undeniable. The first call arrived at 9:20 a.m. Her phone flashed W. Franklin private line, and she answered without a moment's pause. She was still in silk pajamas, sipping an oat milk latte, scrolling through the glowing press from the gala. Her photo was everywhere. TechCrunch was calling it a bold generational shift. She smirked. "Walter," she said airily, putting him on speaker, her tablet propped on her knees. "I saw the coverage. We absolutely crushed it." His voice was clipped and strained, not matching her upbeat mood at all. "We have a problem," he stated slowly. "No, you have a problem," she countered, rolling her eyes. "It's not even 9:30, and you're already being dramatic. You activated a custody clause. 94B specifically," he replied. I could hear the distinct, heavy rustle of old paper on his end, the sound of a man digging through something dangerous and long forgotten. "What clause from the founding agreement?" "It was specifically tied to investor transparency at formal company events. Your husband." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He structured it." She scoffed. "We are still talking about this? What does that possibly have to do with me?" His hesitation was palpable. Then, the sound of pure, mature panic entered his voice. "You posed with me on stage during a designated investor event. You call me family." There was a silence that made the weight of his words settle. She glanced at her reflection, still holding the previous night's smile. "And what are you, more or less?" "My mother's lawyer, her trustee, her fixer. This is purely an optics issue." "It stops being an optics issue when you say it on video, under the brand banner, while I am formally registered on the guest list." She froze. His voice ratcheted tighter. An email was sent to the compliance officer at 8:02 a.m. It came from his old admin account. No signature, just the metadata, attachments, timestamped footage, and the guest registry snapshot. "I've reviewed them." She sprang up, splashing her coffee. "What in God's name are you saying, Walter?" "I'm saying," he exhaled, "that you are no longer the majority shareholder." Her hands clenched the edge of the kitchen island. "Excuse me." Clause 94B mandates that if a shareholder publicly aligns themselves with conflicting fiduciary agents during formal investor activities, and if that alignment is verified by timestamped documentation, all voting rights temporarily revert to the founding custodian for a 72-hour review period. As of 8:02 this morning, that is not you. She stared into the distance. He did this. He planned this. You handed him the proof, she spat. It's a technicality. I am paid to monitor technicalities. From a legal standpoint, you raised a massive neon sign declaring a breach. I should have immediately removed myself the moment you invited me onto that stage, but I failed to. And now? And now what? Her voice was thin, sharp. Now the board is deadlocked. Your votes are invalid. The COO has already been informed. An external trustee has been appointed to conduct a review. I've already received a formal notification that my long-standing estate representation rights with your family may be terminated due to a conflict of interest. She started pacing wildly, pulling at her hair with one hand, the other curled into a fist. We can challenge this. I strongly advise against it. The paper trail is spotless. Legally, it's devastating. Emotionally, it's a full-scale detonation. You posed with your mother's estate lawyer and a romantic interest on stage, simultaneously excluding the founder who still technically holds the license and infrastructure rights. She looked out the window, her mouth dry. He's bluffing. Then I suggest you move fast to call that bluff, because the clock is already ticking. 72 hours is all the time he needs. And if he acts during that window, he won't. He wouldn't dare. Walter remained silent. Would he? She asked again, this time barely a whisper. Look, I've known you since you were 13, he finally said. I watched you conquer every obstacle in your path. I still believe in you. But this time, you brought a knife to the stage and then handed him the sheath. Click. He disconnected. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Walter could have said. She stood alone in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming in, spotlighting the triumphant press release still open on her tablet. True family, true vision. Below it, the smiling picture of her, Andrew, and the man whose name had just obliterated her from her own empire. Clause 94B. She couldn't even recall signing it, but he remembered every stroke of the pen. At exactly 12:03 p.m., the boardroom door was securely locked. 13 executive chairs. One sweating water pitcher at the center of the table. Half the board looked like they hadn't slept. The other half looked like they'd just discovered they were on the wrong side of history. There were no decorative flowers, no fancy catering, no glossy packets. This wasn't a PR event, it was a reckoning. Her chair remained vacant. Her nameplate had been quietly removed. Outside, in the glass-walled hallway, She paced frantically in her heels. Her makeup was unfinished, and she shouted into her phone. Nobody opened the door. Not even the receptionist looked up. She simply typed notes with her headphones on, avoiding eye contact as if it were now mandated company policy. Inside, the meeting commenced. First, the acknowledgement of the 8:02 a.m. compliance alert. The VP of Compliance, Grande Demar Silverhair, an ex-SEC veteran famous for her unflappable neutrality, read her statement. Per Clause 94B of the Founder's Integrity Provision, documented fiduciary breach has activated the Custodian Override Protocol. All voting rights of Shareholder B are suspended pending a full review. Shareholder B was her. Clark rubbed his temples, muttering, "Holy hell." Debin, a good-natured, smart, and nervous middle manager, looked up and asked, "So, the founder holds custody?" Rand nodded. "As of this morning, yes. For 72 hours. And he intends to use it." A brief pause. Rand scanned the documents before her. He has submitted 3 motions via the trustee's Dropbox. All are confidential. All fall within his rights under the override conditions. A nervous ripple went through the room. Someone whispered, "He's going to go ballistic." Debin corrected him. He already did. Publicly, on video, with a lawyer. A newly promoted junior board member looked confused. "That man is actually her mother's estate manager?" "Yes," Rand replied, her voice dry. "And he is listed on SEC filings as a passive financial interest holder." This, combined with her public endorsement of him at a formal investor event, created a situation that was, to put it mildly. The chairman, a quiet, old-guard figure with a portfolio older than most of the staff, tapped his pen deliberately. "And the boyfriend?" Rand didn't look up. "He has no formal employment registration, no vesting schedule, no NDA, and no clearance." "So, he's a legal time bomb," someone else observed. "He is neither staff nor family, and he is therefore unprotected." Another board member muttered, "Then why in God's name was he on that stage?" Grande snapped her folder shut. "I assume the founder asked himself that same question years ago. That's why he wrote Clause 94B in the first place." Outside, she scanned her ID card again. Red light. She tried again. Red light. The head of security appeared at the end of the hall, polite but completely firm. "Ma'am, your credentials have been temporarily placed on hold. We are advised to conduct a security revalidation." She let out a harsh laugh. "Security revalidation? I founded this board." He didn't waver. "We are following internal protocol, ma'am." "Sir." That final, formal address landed harder than any insult. Inside, the VP of Compliance continued. "A proposal is on the table," Rand stated, "to immediately appoint a neutral, third-party trustee to manage all shareholder decisions for the next quarter. If approved, any board votes initiated during the override window will require dual signature authentication, one from the trustee, one from the head of compliance." The room fell silent until Debin slowly raised his hand. Second. Moments later, the motion passed unanimously. The founder had initiated the reset, but the board had just voted to make it permanent. There was no argument, no door slamming, only a definitive shift in power. Outside, her voice, arguing on the phone, was barely audible through the glass. No one in the boardroom bothered to turn and look anymore. The change was complete. She entered the house like a woman trying to convince herself the illusion of power still held. The place, glass, stone, and steel, looked exactly the same, but the atmosphere felt hollow. No music, no lingering trace of her perfume in the foyer, no hum from the coffee machine. Just a profound silence, broken only by the sound of a zipper coming from upstairs. He was packing, not in a fit of rage, and not vindicatively, but with the measured precision of a man checking items off a list he'd committed to memory long ago. 3 pairs of pants, 2 sets of running gear, the navy blue shirt she'd once complained made him look too corporate for meetings, all folded and packed perfectly. He picked up the leather toiletry bag she'd given him in Chicago, paused, and then deliberately placed it back down. Then, finally, he spoke. "I already left 3 years ago. You just signed the paperwork to make it official for me." Her breathing hitched. He zipped the suitcase without a flicker of hesitation. "This is still our house," she said, her voice softening now. "You can't just disappear." He stood up. "You disappeared first." "That is not fair." "It's the truth. You vanished the moment your mother started whispering about inherited shares. When Walters began showing up at pitch meetings, I wasn't even invited to. When you stopped introducing me as the co-founder and started calling me the silent partner." He turned, meeting her eyes directly. "You disappeared the second I became an inconvenience to your chosen narrative." She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. "Don't do this," she managed finally. "Not like this." He reached into his carry-on and pulled out a simple black frame. He held it out to her. At first, she just stared, refusing to take it. It was the gala photo. Her lover, Walters, all smiles, all perfectly staged. The banner and their logo floated like a taunting ghost behind them. "Remember this?" he asked. The caption. It said, "True family, true vision." That was your message, wasn't it? Her trembling hands finally took the frame. "I personally funded that banner," he said quietly. "I negotiated the lease for that venue. I paid for the custom glass logo in the lobby. I created the entire infrastructure that made your vision look believable to investors. And you," his voice remained low, but it gained a terrifying edge, "you erased me in front of everyone who mattered." Tears welled in her eyes, but she fought them back. "We built this together." "No," he corrected her. "I built it. You simply rebranded the narrative." She stepped toward him. "Please don't go. We can fix this. We can talk to the board. Go back in. We'll fix it." "You already fixed it," he said. "You just fixed it without me. I was trying to protect what we had." "You were only trying to protect yourself," he countered, cutting her off. "From ever feeling like you owed me anything. You wanted to soar and pretend you were never carried aloft." He grabbed his keys and walked past her. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice breaking completely. "The only place left where I can trust the silence," he replied. She followed him down the stairs, nearly falling on the last step. "But we have a history," she pleaded. "We have a life." "No," he said, pausing at the front door. "You have a rolling news cycle, an uncleared boyfriend, and a lawyer who just destroyed his own career posing in a photo he should have run from." At the door, he looked around the house one last time. The same sofa, the same lamp, the vase she'd broken during their first major fight, still glued back together, as if a quick repair was ever enough. She whispered, "Why didn't you stop me?" He looked back. "I did," he said. "Every time I tried. You told me I was controlling." Then he walked out. She didn't follow him. She just stood in the doorway, clutching the framed photo, hoping it was still proof of something salvageable. It wasn't. He had already processed his grief in absolute solitude. He hadn't just left, he was utterly gone. She didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt, God, no, but because the foundation of her life had begun to tremble, and she couldn't pinpoint the epicenter of the quake. The board was inaccessible. Her ID badge was useless. Her lawyer sounded like he was halfway to a nervous breakdown, and her husband, the man who was now her ex-husband in every sense that mattered, had quietly emptied his life into a suitcase and walked away without so much as a threat or a final plea. That silence was more deafening than any argument ever could have been. She sat at the marble kitchen island, her perfect nails tapping against an untouched wine glass, refreshing her inbox every 30 seconds. Nothing. No email demanding a reversal. No frantic message from an investor. No, this was all a mistake. Just silence, and an inbox full of glowing press clippings that now looked like a cruel, elaborate joke. Then, a notification pinged at 6:11 a.m. The sender was unfamiliar, a notice from Chasseret Legal Trust. Her first instinct was to dismiss it as spam, but the subject line made her entire body lock up. Beneficiary reassignment completed. Equity custody update confirmation. She blinked, opened it, and read it again. The document was cold, completely impersonal, written in pure, sterile procedural language, but its contents annihilated her. Per the conditions outlined in Trust Agreement CRLT 0417X, Clause 12C, all vested shares held in your name under custodial trust are hereby reassigned due to the violation of the dual fidelity clause as defined in the initial funding agreement. Her hands were shaking as she clicked the attachment. A spreadsheet appeared, clean, crisp lines showing company name, share breakdown. Her equity before, 46.7%. Now, 0.83%. She stared at the number, expecting it to glitch, to self-correct, waiting for the universe to admit it was just playing a terrible prank. It didn't. Her control was gone. Not merely reduced, but completely eradicated. She didn't own enough stock to cast a single vote. She couldn't even approve a catering bill without another signature. She scrolled down to the bottom of the email. There it was, the clause in stark black and white. All shares held in trust shall remain under the beneficiary's control for the duration of a marital fidelity and unhalted fiduciary to the founding custodian. Any documented, recorded, or publicly made breach will result in immediate reassignment to the primary custodian without need for a board vote or court order. She laughed, a choking, gasping sound. Then she pitched the wine glass across the kitchen. It exploded against the stainless steel refrigerator, the red stain spreading across the surface like blood from a wound she hadn't known she had until that moment. She snatched up her phone, called her lawyer again. No answer. She called her mother, straight to voicemail. She called Walters. He finally answered, his voice tentative, like a man trapped in a burning building who knows the exit is closed. "What in the hell is this trust, Clawback?" she hissed. "I warned you," he said, his voice completely hollow. "When he insisted on separate vesting tracks tied to personal conduct, I told you it was excessive. You dismissed it as symbolic. It was, until you stood next to me on that stage and made it devastatingly real." She swallowed hard. "Reverse it. Now." "I cannot." "Then fix it. I am no longer legally clear to represent you. A conflict of interest was filed. I've been officially recused." She slammed the phone down. The board application on her tablet refreshed. Everywhere she looked, his name, the founder, the custodian, the trustee. He hadn't publicly attacked her. He hadn't posted a single word. He hadn't even responded to her caption. But quietly, in the background, he had triggered one clause after another, like playing keys on a piano, each note timed perfectly. She had mocked his legal paranoia, calling it archaic and controlling. But the trust wasn't designed to control her. It was designed to survive her. And it had. She slid down onto the floor, her back against the cabinets, drawing sharp, shallow breaths. No board, no votes, no leverage, just a single email confirming that everything she thought she owned now belonged to the man she had so casually erased, and he had done it without ever raising his voice. The story began circulating in a corner of the internet she had always ignored, Founders Forum Pro, a private, old-school space where veteran VCs and burnt-out tech lawyers traded war stories and posted dire warnings. The clip appeared in a thread titled Boardroom Suicide. Has anyone seen this gala moment? There was no context, just a 42-second video link. She was on stage, smiling, impeccably dressed, bathed in warm light. "Then, he's family now," she says, gesturing. Her new lover, Walters, her mother's estate lawyer, stood proudly behind her. The camera was discreetly overhead, the timestamp visible in the corner, the logo on the banner sharp and clear. The comments poured in immediately. User Angel Ron. Massive stones considering who paid for the stage. Followed by Bayer hit. Founders Clause 94B. Absolute textbook. That's exactly why the override was written. The momentum built. User Pre-Sir. Throwing away a majority stake on camera. Peak narcissism. User India Killer. Heard the founder walked out quietly and let the contract do the talking. Massive respect. User Labid. Can someone post the trust clause text? I'm creating a template. By 2:47 p.m., the clip had been cross-posted to Exacal, a notorious hub for anonymous HR nightmares and merger gossip. By 4:01 p.m., it hit Reddit. By 5:30 p.m., someone had turned it into a viral TikTok with the caption, "The jailbait," and the sound of her voice saying, "He's family now skulled." By dusk, it was everywhere on Twitter. A venture capital firm in Palo Alto quote-tweeted it with a blunt warning to founders. Never marry someone who is smarter than you, and then hands them the weaponized paperwork. Then the real media picked it up. Not Forbes, not Wired, but the outlets that feed on public downfall. Daily. Ran the headline first. Founder loses control after Gala Gaffe. Watch the clip that sparked the reset. Then TechCrunch. How Clause 94B quietly decimated the power dynamic at one of 2025's hottest startups. The worst headline of all came from Business Insider. She called him family. The contract called it a conflict of interest. That one instantly became gospel. She opened her laptop at 11:06 p.m. and found 231 new notifications. One from her old mentor. "I warned you not to let the lawyers stand behind you. Optics is a coffin." One from her former PR director. "The damage control window is gone. Recommend stepping away for optics and citing a mental health narrative." One from Walters himself. "Do not contact me again. Effective immediately, I have resigned." She searched her own name. Every result was the same video, the same devastating moment. Her voice, bright and carefree, serving as her own undoing. She slammed the laptop shut, went into the bathroom, and stared at her reflection. She looked like a person who had just broadcast herself giving away a winning lottery ticket in high definition. Her phone buzzed. A text from a former college friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. The text read, "Hey, sorry. Just saw the clip. Are you okay?" Followed quickly by a second text. "Oh, are you really that delusional now?" She dropped the phone into the sink. The world didn't need to come for her. She had constructed the scaffold herself, climbed it, smiled for the camera, and then signed the register at the base of the platform. Wednesday morning dawned under an overcast sky. The city looked muted, as if even the weather refused to take a side. She arrived at the law firm in a car that still had her name on the insurance policy, but was no longer on the official company fleet list. Her parking validation didn't work. She slammed her sunglasses onto the counter and hissed her last name. The receptionist simply blinked, nodded, and handed her a generic visitor's badge, the kind typically reserved for couriers and interns. No one greeted her in the hallway. No one offered her coffee. She was utterly unaccustomed to moving through a space she had once commanded without a single person acknowledging her presence. The silence cut deeper than any online insult. She kicked open the conference room door without knocking. 4 people sat inside. None of them showed surprise. "Where is Brian?" she snapped, referring to the junior partner. The replacement lawyer raised his hand tentatively. "Brian has been reassigned. I'm handling the transition now." "I'm not here for a transition. I'm here for a reversal. Whatever he filed, undo it." He didn't flinch. He simply pointed to a folder on the table. It was thick, final, and cold. She snatched it up, flipping furiously through pages of dense documents she'd once considered beneath her attention. Custody authorizations, equity reassignments, voting amendments. Document after document, cross-referenced, notarized, time-stamped. Then she saw it. Clause 94B activation event confirmed. Signature, founder, initial funder, and custodian status finalized. She kept flipping. Her name appeared less and less frequently until she reached the final pages and found her old title crossed out. A thick black line ran through co-founder/CEO, replaced by a line that read, "Former shareholder under review for breach of fiduciary terms and public misrepresentation." The next page detailed her lover, Andrew Sublak, listed as conflicting participant, unauthorized affiliate introduced at a formal investor event. Beneath that, no employee record, no NDA, no compliance clearance. The following page concerned Walters S. Franklin, permanently disqualified from his state representation under Section 11C of the Intergenerational Trust Clause due to exposure to a dual interest and unethical proximity to the beneficiary during the compliance window. Her stomach clenched. None of this is actually legal. The junior partner spoke with detached professionalism. "Ma'am, it is not merely legal. It was automated and pre-authorized years ago. All it required was the activation trigger." Her hand trembled as she sank into the nearest chair. "What did he do?" she whispered. The legal assistant, who had been quietly working by the printer the entire time, looked up and spoke softly. "He didn't do anything. You did. He only prepared for it." The room became silent again. It wasn't just the documents she saw. It was the crushing realization that this was not a desperate counterattack. It was the slow, patient, brilliant architecture of consequence. Every clause was linked to another. Every trust map tied to her conduct. Every silence. Every deference she'd paid him over the years. It had all been logged in a vast, unseen ledger, and she had personally signed every page. Outside, a bus drove by, plastered with a full-wrap ad for her company's latest campaign. "We continue to design the future." Her face used to be the centerpiece of that ad. It had been cropped out this week. She stood up. No fire in her eyes, no volume in her voice. Just a profound, dead weight in her chest, the sensation of falling in slow motion. She didn't ask for a copy of the folder. She didn't threaten litigation. Not because she couldn't, but because she finally understood. He hadn't needed to burn down her empire. He had simply constructed his own invisible exit so flawlessly that when she finally stepped on the tripwire, the only thing left echoing in the silence was the sound of her own voice, declaring, "He's family now." And he had heard every word.